Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us wherever you are around the world. My name is Graham Smith, I'm here from WithSecure. We're a cybersecurity company. We've been a Salesforce partner since 2016 on the App Exchange with a solution called WithSecure Cloud Protection for Salesforce. My role at WithSecure is to manage our global relationship with Salesforce. So on a daily basis, I'm speaking to people from across the Salesforce ecosystem. One of the nicest people you can come across is Rob Thomson. So Rob, thanks for being with me today.
It's a pleasure, Graham. It's good to be here.
Perhaps you could kick off by introducing yourself to everyone in your role at Salesforce.
Sure. So I'm Rob Thomson. I'm a security architect with Salesforce. So I'm based in the London office. And yeah, my role is to talk to people about the Salesforce security ecosystem.
So Rob and I are going to have a conversation today about cloud security and Salesforce security in particular. We really welcome your questions and your comments. Rob and I will try and answer some of those at the end. We'll also have some WithSecure team members online answering questions. So we can't emphasize enough, please let us know your thoughts, your comments, and certainly your questions. We're going to start from a place of a problem and try and solve that as we go along today. And that's that we find out from Accenture that in many instances, security isn't necessarily involved in discussions about the cloud. So Accenture runs an annual survey, and in one of their recent ones, respondents to the survey said that in 50% of the cases, security is not part of the cloud discussion. So 32% had no involvement and 18% had limited involvement when it came to the cloud. So turning to you, Rob, what's your take on that kind of quite problematic scenario for organizations on the cloud?
Yeah, so I think there could be a number of factors at play that are underpinning those statistics, Graham. So one thing that might be at play is a question of priorities. So as we know, organizations are delivering digital transformation at great pace. We are working in an environment where there's particularly difficult financial headwinds at the moment. So there's a lot of pressure. There are a lot of timelines to be met. And so what might be happening in some cases is that actually projects and those people who are delivering this digital transformation are perhaps prioritizing aspects of that transformation which are more highly visible and have a more immediate value that can be surfaced. As well as that, we're also seeing challenges around complexity and resourcing as well. So as we know, there is a skill shortage in the cybersecurity market at the moment. And even for organizations who do have security people in place, then those security folks are also working in quite difficult conditions. So it may be the case that those security people have multiple different cloud platforms that they're responsible for. They may have on-premise platforms that they're responsible for. And as we've said, organizations are delivering change at a really great pace today. So that means that their area of responsibility is expanding every single day. And of course, bearing in mind, that's all in the context of an evolving threat landscape as well. So it might be the case that for some folks, they're aware of this need to have a conversation about cloud security. But perhaps that's being delayed. Perhaps they feel they're swimming against the current, potentially, in some cases. I think one other thing that may be at play here is perhaps just some misunderstanding. So perhaps for a small proportion of people, there is a misunderstanding in terms of what their responsibilities are when it comes to cloud services. So in an extreme example of that, it may be that there's an organization that believes that perhaps, because we're using a cloud service, we've absolved ourselves of any responsibility for security because the cloud provider is doing it all. And as we know, Graham, that's not the case. I think the last point I'd make around that is something that actually popped up on LinkedIn this week. And that was a statement by a chap called John Edwards, who's the UK Information Commissioner. And he said that the biggest risk, or the biggest cyber risk to businesses today, was actually from complacency within the organization. So I think there may be some people operating in this difficult environment, security people operating in this difficult environment who might think that's a little bit tactless or a bit insensitive potentially. But I think the intention behind it is a good one, and that is that it pays to question your assumptions, and it pays to think of security as an ongoing process and to never rest on our laurels.
Yeah, good points, Rob. So, those of you watching online, let us know what you think. Are you involved in the cloud discussion? If you're a security person or not, let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. And I think, your point about organizations being complacent, that's a concern. I think the last time that Mark Benioff, your CEO, talked about security, he was saying that there's an ongoing battle. It never ends. The sort of combat of security threats is ongoing. And I think that's definitely true. So I think that it's worrying that companies are complacent, or there's a perception that they are. I think, it's an ongoing challenge, and organizations always need to be aware of things, particularly when it comes to the cloud. And I think the other thing we've established today is it's not easy. The more cloud platforms you have, the harder the challenge to mitigate risk on them. So I think that's something that organizations should and are increasingly aware of. So obviously we want to have conversations where security is involved in the cloud discussion. So why should security teams get involved in cloud discussions, and how can they do that?
So security teams should be involved in the cloud discussion, and indeed in any discussion where a service is being provisioned or stood up by an organization. The reason for that is because an organization will provision a service. It will use a cloud service in order to provide the business with a capability. Within that service as well, it's almost always the case that the organization will put data into that service. So that data could be anything really. It could be intellectual property, it could be sensitive data, it could be the personal data of our customers. So why should security teams get involved? Because if something happens that compromises that service or compromises the data within that service, then there are some well-documented and fairly serious repercussions in many cases. So in the first instance, as we've said, that service has been provisioned to provide the business with a capability. If that capability is taken away, then our ability to service customers is also impacted. As well as that, there are, in many cases, pretty severe punitive fines if data isn't deemed to have been looked after properly. And then there's all the other things that can ensue after a breach or a security incident, reputational damage, loss of trust, and so on. So lots of really strong reasons for being involved. In terms of how security can make its way into these discussions, we see varying different approaches with different organizations. So I would say that in more mature organizations, we see that security is championed and sponsored at the highest level within the organization. So at executive level, that is then manifested within the organization with security policies, with security standards, with ongoing training and awareness. And that's training and awareness for everybody around security, not just security folks, of course. And then an ongoing assessment of security for any services or platforms or infrastructure that you're using. So a few different ways that the more mature organizations use. We also see some organizations who put gateways into the project life cycle. So if we're procuring a new cloud service, for example, then we might say, well, okay, we're going to do a review as part of the project delivery to say, is this meeting with our requirements? Is it protecting our data adequately? And then, last but not least, there's other things they can do. So they can talk to the likes of you and I, talk to the Salesforce partner ecosystem, talk to folks at Salesforce, and ask the questions that you need the answers to.
Yeah, perfect. So let's turn the sort of lens towards Salesforce. At WithSecure, we always talk very favorably about customers using established cloud infrastructure. When you outsource to Salesforce, you're outsourcing some of the risk and responsibility to a world-class organization for security. So what do you actually do at Salesforce to help security teams get involved in the cloud discussion?
Sure. So at Salesforce, there's a huge security team. We also have field personnel, so customer-facing personnel. Most field personnel can have a discussion around security, and if anybody can't, they can signpost you to somebody who can. We also have formally rolled security people, so people like me, for example. And my role really is to increase awareness around the Salesforce approach to security, around some of the controls that we offer. Also there to have dialogue with Salesforce customers, to remove any misunderstandings, to provide clarity. One of the things that we do, or one of the things we do offer is around workshops where we will proactively engage with our customers, and we will seek to understand what it is that's keeping them awake at night. So what's top of mind in terms of security and compliance and privacy for our customers, and then what we can leverage within the Salesforce ecosystem to help meet those goals. So yeah, a number of things there. What we also do, of course, is you can search online. There's a lot of material online around Salesforce and Salesforce security, and then other media content as well. So having the dubious pleasure of listening to you and I chat for a few minutes, Graham.
Sure, yeah, I think there's that general balance of, written help and support, and I think trust.salesforce.com is a really good resource that you have online. And yeah, I agree with you, your security team are very visible at all of your various global events, and I think again you're not shy in having conversations with customers about security, so I think it's incumbent on the customer to take advantage of those opportunities and speak to what is actually a really big ecosystem, and I think one that's becoming increasingly knowledgeable about security, whether it's more security partners on the App Exchange or it's other partners like system integrators who are perhaps getting more of a point of view, or actually domain expertise on security within their Salesforce practices. I think it's all really good development that we see here at WithSecure. So just picking up on something that I heard from one of your colleagues, one of your fellow security architects working in North America. He said that when it comes to security discussions about the cloud, often organizations need to have some kind of a therapy session when they actually kind of look at what taking on a new cloud platform, particular a kind of transformational one like Salesforce, actually entails when it comes to security. And he sort of advised that customers should be asking questions of Salesforce, quite rightly, but also questions of themselves with particular reference to perhaps the workload that they are looking to go on the cloud, which often they're responsible for the security pertaining to that, whether you're a bank taking on mortgage applications, or you're a recruitment firm receiving CVs, or a university onboarding students. So what kinds of questions should Salesforce customers be asking yourselves, but also importantly asking themselves?
Sure. So there's a whole range of questions that can be asked to understand more about security in the cloud and security at Salesforce as well. Many of these questions, I guess, you could either ask to yourself, as you could ask inwardly within an organization, or to Salesforce. They're probably best done as a discussion, as part of a dialogue, because obviously some of the answers to some will help inform and lead other questions in different directions. But I think to pick up on a few examples in terms of what organizations can ask themselves, first and foremost, what are we responsible for when it comes to security in the cloud or security at Salesforce? Do we understand the shared responsibilities model? So for anyone that's not aware, the shared responsibilities model is a model which sets out who is responsible for security for different areas of a cloud service. So in terms of knowing what you're responsible for, that's a really crucial step. Once that's established, there are other questions that organizations can ask. So in terms of the questions that an organization can ask themselves, I think one of the first ones would be, okay, so we're using a service, maybe we're using Salesforce, for example. What is the impact to my business or to my organization if that service is somehow compromised, or the data within that service is somehow compromised? And by compromised, of course, we mean either accidental or malicious corruption, deletion, exposure of that data. And the reason that we the reason why companies ask that question is because knowing the answer to that question then helps inform decisions and discussions around, okay, so we're using this cloud service, we know we've got data in there, what is the actual level of security rigor that we need to put around that, and what are the controls, what's the configuration we need to have in place that is commensurate with the criticality of that service and the criticality of data that we have within there. As well as that, I think it's thinking about threats. So thinking about the tools, the mechanisms that are going to be used legitimately in many cases within that cloud service, and thinking about what are some of the guardrails we can put around that. So, how can we understand if somebody is doing something untoward? How can we be made aware of that? And then how can we follow up afterwards and determine perhaps what's been done? And then I think it's thinking as well about, or asking questions as well about cyber resilience. So, we often think very much when we're thinking about controls, about protective controls and detective controls. But organizations can ask themselves, well, okay, if the worst does happen, what will we do? How will we respond to that? We get a phone call at 3 a.m. and the worst has happened. You put the phone down. What's the next step you're going to take? How we're going to communicate with the cloud provider, if a cloud provider is involved? How are we going to communicate internally, and who is it within our organization that actually knows what we've done in terms of security at Salesforce, at another cloud provider? So having that response, having thought through how an organization will react, and having asked those questions internally is a really useful thing to have done. So I think then in terms of questions to Salesforce, really, once those initial questions have been asked, so we've understood the criticality of the service to us, we've understood the criticality of the data that's in there, then we can go to Salesforce, we can go to any cloud provider and say, right, we know how important this is. We have questions for you about how you're protecting our service, about how you're protecting our data, and then get into the weeds, get into the discussions about the nuances of those controls and what that means for you as an organization.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rob. Good answer. So let's talk a little bit, you touched a little bit on threats. Let's maybe talk about that in a bit more detail. Often these we find come from, there can be some internal threats. And I think in terms of tackling those, you've got some really good enhanced platform security. So you have the out-of-the-box security, things like two-factor authentication that you've mandated recently, and then add-on security as well. There's also external threats, which is perhaps a little bit more where WithSecure come in. And you're right that we see at WithSecure, most cloud threats are related to legitimate access or legitimate functionality. So yeah, where the cloud provider enables some fantastic workload on the cloud, for example, we're going to let our customers send us passport details or bank statement details up to Salesforce, and what we're doing is help perhaps mitigate any external threats pertaining to that content. So what kind of threats are you seeing at Salesforce, and what are customers commonly asking you to help them to tackle?
Well, as you said there, Graham, Salesforce, many other cloud providers pride themselves on the rich suite of capabilities and functionality that their platform offers, and that's been leveraged to great success by many of our customers. So when we think about those capabilities, when we think about the tooling that's available to us within a service, then I think it's important to also consider that if that tooling is abused or used in a way that we don't want it to be used, then that can present a problem from a security perspective. So to kind of put a bit more meat on the bone around that, in terms of an example, one of the things that we often talk to customers about is around ingress and egress of data from Salesforce. So if we use a really simple example around that, if I'm a Salesforce user, I may have the ability to go and run reports on certain data sets. I can interrogate that data, I can put it into a report, I can shape it the way I want it to be shaped. I can then potentially export it from Salesforce. That's obviously a capability that Salesforce provides, and one that's used very widely. But thinking about that capability, we also need to think about some of the guardrails that we might put around it. So, for example, what we've just talked about might be a completely legitimate use case for me. I need to do that to do my day-to-day job. But if I, as a Salesforce user, for example, fall out with my employer, go rogue, decide to turn against the company that I work for example, and I start to interrogate data sets that aren't relevant for my job, I may start to pull down sensitive data or significant quantities of data. I may then try and start to export sensitive data. So it may be the case that for some organizations we need to put guardrails around that. So yes, Joe Bloggs, he can export reports day to day, but do we want to think about what he can export? Do we want to think about how much he can export, and the type of data that he has access to? So I think in summary, really, Graham, what we're saying there is that security has to be an enabler. It has to complement the business. We have to keep innovating. We have to keep bringing this functionality and these capabilities to our customers, because our customers like it and they want it and they need it. But at the same time, from a security perspective, we need to ensure that there is governance and there is control around some of these capabilities.
Yeah, I'd concur with that. I think, security can definitely be the enemy of innovation, and we don't want that to be the case. We want security to enable good outcomes for customers, and I think that while Salesforce has that standard out-of-the-box security offering, it isn't fit for everybody. And what we've seen is organizations who really care about the cloud and care about the security pertaining to it giving sort of serious thought. Do we just need the base level, or do we need to enhance that offering? And I think that's where organizations will succeed, when they really do that thinking for themselves. And I know that you're there to help them and guide them through that, because we've sort of shouted out right at the top, it's quite complex and it's a difficult challenge, but one that organizations ultimately have to go through. So we've talked about the shared responsibility model. At WithSecure, we absolutely, advocate all organizations being really aware fundamentally of what that model means for them as an organization, and do some thinking around that. But are there any other frameworks that you often refer to and you think might be useful for people online today to actually know about and do some thinking around?
Yes, absolutely. So, as we've said, you don't have to be a cybersecurity professional to start a security discussion. And one of the great things about some of these frameworks, so the NIST cybersecurity framework is a commonly referenced framework, is that it allows anybody really to pick it up. It's publicly available, it's free, and to start thinking about how they can take up the subject of cloud security or cybersecurity more generally within their organization. So what is the NIST cybersecurity framework? So it's a structure, it's a framework for organizing, managing and reducing cybersecurity risk. It finds a lot of favor with the companies that we speak to, I think for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it's technology agnostic, it's industry agnostic. I think one of the great things about it is it uses plain language, so it's not brimming with acronyms and security jargon. It's very easy to get to grips with. One of the other great things about it in the context of our discussions around cloud security is, in the early phases of the NIST cybersecurity framework, it also talks about establishing cybersecurity roles and responsibilities, and that's both internally within the organization and with partners, so with cloud services as well. And again, we're very keen to make everybody as aware as possible around the shared responsibilities model, and and the responsibilities that are incumbent upon users of cloud services. I think last but not least on that point, Graham, is there are other frameworks available. We hear about various other different frameworks, some pretty much as common as the NIST cybersecurity framework. The great thing about them is that they do provide a structured approach, and I think specifically in in the case of the NIST cybersecurity framework, it emphasizes the fact that security isn't a point in time process. It's a cycle, it's an ongoing process, and it's something that needs to be revisited constantly.
Perfect. That's a good place to finish the formal discussion. So I just wanted to leave some takeaways for people watching online today. So what we've discussed about together with Rob today is make sure that security and cloud application teams are talking to each other, and that cybersecurity is an ongoing process. It never really stops. Certainly understand the business processes that your organization is delivering on the cloud, and think about what particular risks you might need to mitigate within your organization, and be aware that that's not going to be the same as for other organizations. They'll be unique to where you work. Certainly get educated about the shared responsibility model, and frameworks like NIST, and understand how they might be able to help you. And then finally, do talk to Salesforce about security if you're a customer or thinking about using the platform, but also talk to other partners that you might know within your network, and potentially look at people on the App Exchange that might be able to help you. There's a really rich security ecosystem that supports Salesforce that sits outside of Salesforce itself. So one thing I can confidently say today is this will be the best LinkedIn Live that Rob and I have ever done, because it's our first. So what we're going to try and do now is seamlessly move to some question and answers. So we've got the first one here. Are there any recent security developments, Rob, at Salesforce that might have a bearing on security that you think people online might like to know about?
Well, I think the biggest development that is in flight at the moment is something called Hyperforce. So for anyone that's not familiar with Hyperforce is Salesforce moving away from what we call our first party infrastructure, and moving on to infrastructure provided by the likes of AWS. So taking advantage of the scale and the regional availability that those platforms have. So that's something that's in flight at the moment. A lot of our customers are talking to us about it, and exciting times ahead around that. Okay.
I have another question online, which is, what role will AI play on cybersecurity in the cloud? I'm going to take that one first before throwing it over to Rob. I think what we recognize at WithSecure is that while AI can be capitalized on by organizations defending themselves, it can also be capitalized on by attackers. So be aware that AI will be used by the good guys and the bad guys when it comes to security and threats. What's your take on AI coming into cloud security?
I think it's broadly similar, Graham. I think what it will do is increase the speed with which people can get up to a certain level, either in terms of defending or offensive security. But beyond that, it's leveling up both sides ultimately. So if you're a beginner, you're going to be able to use it to gain insights, to gain knowledge. But at the same time, your blue teams or the teams that you're working against are going to have those same tools available to them as well. So yeah, it's going to level up both sides, I think. Okay.
Another question we've got online is, how do you know if your cybersecurity guru is actually properly trained or not?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Well, I think in terms of... So cybersecurity is a really broad subject area. So one of my peers, when I arrived at Salesforce, the first thing he said to me was, there's no such thing as a cybersecurity expert because it's such a broad and such a deep subject area. I don't know. I think if I had a colleague who was in cybersecurity, I think a great way to involve people and to perhaps not assess them, but to ensure that the organization is as secure as it possibly can be is to bring them into discussions, involve them, ask them questions, ask them what they can offer, ask them how you can work with them, and maybe start the discussion around some of the threats that the organization may be facing, some of the compliance requirements or regulatory requirements that an organization is subject to. Bring them into the discussions and invite them to be involved, and hopefully that's going to bring benefits for the organization.
Yeah. Another great question that we've had online: who takes the lead on Salesforce security? Is it the application or the CISO or somebody else?
So I think it can be any of those people. There's obviously a team element to this. So what we do find is that sometimes we talk to Salesforce administrators who are strong on security, who have a good knowledge of the Salesforce security ecosystem and the controls that are available. More often than not, we're probably talking to people who are formally rolled in security. But I don't think there's any hard and fast rules about that. I think, as we've said, the main thing today is understand what you are responsible for, and begin that dialogue. Begin, chat to Graham, chat to me, and let's move things forward. I think what happens sometimes as well is if we are talking to administrators, Salesforce administrators, for example, then we'll often, or internally, there'll need to be some sort of deferring to security teams within the organization who will set the tone, who will provide guidance and steering to people.
Yeah, I think we see that too at WithSecure. I think the average security team becoming more comfortable and more educated around cloud security, and also Salesforce teams becoming more aware of security. And often how we find this surfaces in projects is it's the non-functional requirement. So functionally, can Salesforce help us to reduce costs by moving a physical call center to Salesforce Service Cloud? Yes, it absolutely can. But then also, what are the non-functional requirements that go with that deployment? And often security, along with things like performance, is a key sort of non-functional requirement. So I think we're starting to see Salesforce teams really calling out these non-functional requirements. And like you've said, putting their hands up and asking the security team to look at that and what do the security requirements of this Salesforce deployment need to be. So I think it's definitely a team effort when it comes to cybersecurity on platforms like Salesforce. Question here for you, Rob, I think, it could be for WithSecure. Do you use ethical hackers as part of your security go-to-market?
We do. We have a bug bounty program at Salesforce, and we also have pen testers who we work with to test the security of our services. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot of use cases at WithSecure where a pen tester said, fantastic, Salesforce is a really secure platform and there's no red flags here, but actually there's a lot of unstructured data that's coming in from external users, and that might be something you want to look at a security control for. So I agree with you, these third-party pen tests or ethical hackers can often bring about positive outcomes when it comes to cybersecurity.
I think the other point around that, Graham, just to add, is that people can conduct their own pen tests as well these days as well. So
yeah, perfect. Just looking at some more questions. What's the typical Salesforce use cases that may need to... What are the typical Salesforce use cases that you might need to be aware of when it comes to cloud security? Are there any common use cases where there actually needs to be a security thought process and answer?
So there's a few really, and they're potentially technology or service agnostic. So I think the basic of good security hygiene. So thinking about things like layered protection, and particularly the principle of least privilege is something that is very relevant for Salesforce, as it is for many different services and applications. What do we mean by that? So it ties in to some extent with the example we talked about before. So ultimately it means give people the tools and the access that they need to do their job, but don't give them any more than they need to achieve that, hopefully for obvious reasons. And then having that leveraging the role-based access that's available within Salesforce and adhering to that principle of least privilege is going to bring benefits in many respects down the line when it comes to the security program and having people accessing the appropriate data at the appropriate time. So in addition to that, one of the other things that we often talk about is the MFA piece, so multi-factor authentication, which is being enforced as we speak on different services. So that's when we think about data loss protection, multi-factor authentication is a very, very key part of that. Historically, we used to be concerned with the perimeter and people trying to exfiltrate data through different mechanisms. Today, social engineering is a very significant part of the threat landscape, and so multi-factor authentication does help to combat that to some extent.
Perfect. Well, listen, thank you, Rob, and thank you to everyone for watching. We hope we've answered some of your questions online today. We also hope we've given you some good advice on cloud security that you can take back to your organizations and implement from this point onwards. So all that remains is to say from Rob and myself, thanks again, and see you next time. Bye for now.